Hi everyone, Sean Humphreys here. Welcome to the Take Charge or Change podcast. Well, in this podcast, we're going to talk about the notion of everything changes. What we're going to do over the next several weeks is we're going to take excerpts from the ebook we've put together, The Resilient Professional. So the blog will have a lot of content that you can go to, and the videos will be just kind of a high-level summary or narrative about what the chapter deals with. So keep that in mind. So if you want to get into more detail on some of the topics that I talk about in the blog, you can always go back to the blog, look at it directly, and we'll have links to other helpful resources or topic areas. So everything changes. What am I getting at? And it's a little bit of a narrative on what Take Charge or Change is all about. So it's interesting. We live in a time where there's definitely hyper change. At a macro level, the hyper change we're going through is being driven, principally by technology. Technology changes. We're going through massive social changes through immigration patterns driven by wars and uncertainty around the world. Economic change, and so that's a massive disruptor potentially in terms of changes in that area. We've got changes in terms of the environment. And so almost every area that we look at, we're seeing an awful lot of change. Now, when you add to that, and I'll talk about the graying of the population, the planet, in a minute, is you've got an aging demographic. And as we age, we begin to sort of take on a constellation of dilemmas. And those dilemmas will never go away. And so as baby boomers age and as we go through our life cycle, we go through transitions. And so the changes and transitions we deal with personally, things like helping aging parents or loved ones, retirement, the death of a spouse, separation and divorce, those are profoundly impactful to our personal lives. And so on the one hand, we've got these macro forces that are coming down on us, and then we're going through these personal changes. And so at Take Charge or Change, it's really about trying to curate and provide content and training that helps to build personal and professional resilience for individuals and groups and even communities to deal and navigate through these change forces. At one level, the macro; at the other level, the personal, as we navigate personal change and transitions. So when we take a look at all those changes that are impacting us, we've always typically looked to large mediating institutions to help us navigate change. Now, for most of us, we understand that that's not the case anymore. But what I mean by that is we've looked to big government, large employers or organizations, even the church, to help us navigate through change and be a bit of a protective buffer so we don't feel the full onslaught of that change. Well, of course, we live in a world today where those large mediating institutions just don't have the power they used to. So again, technology, economics, social changes, all have eroded the power of those large institutions. Now, look at politics as an example. We still vote. I think many of us vote out of self-interest, and we look at governments or government policy or government philosophy, party philosophy, as a way of initiating change. Increasingly, I think it's going to be difficult for political parties and governments to initiate the kind of change they would like, because on the one hand, we have these national interests, but we live in this global hyper-change community. So government's ability to navigate through that change will be compromised over time, maybe slowly and incrementally, or maybe very quickly. And so it's a difficult thing for politicians, because I think most politicians are good-hearted, they go in for the right reasons, but of course politics is the art of compromise. And on the one hand, to get political power, they sort of have to say to us what the pollsters are kind of telling them we want to hear. And so there's this interesting dance where on the one hand they need to get elected to actually make change, but sometimes they might have to say things to us that they just do it because they know that's what we want. But that may not be the right policy decision. And so politically it's a very, very difficult time. One of the things that's interesting around economic changes, and this is a great example, I was on a holiday recently. Where I live, we don't have Uber. So I had the Uber app. I was wanting to use it. We went to a city that had it. What an amazing experience. I mean, it was convenient. Didn't wait any more than 5 minutes. Cost effective. Cars were clean. The drivers are great. It made the taxi services in my city look ridiculous. So I can see why it's become a very disruptive technology in a lot of cities where established taxi services, people have spent lots of money, 100,000, 200,000 for the taxi medallion to have that ability to operate that service, and then in a heartbeat, that whole system is disrupted economically. So that's an example of what we're talking about. We can't assume that the status quo is going to be the status quo because of these disruptive forces that are going on. The other thing that's going on, and I talked about this, is the graying of the planet. We're getting older. Stats Canada in 2015 said for the first time ever in Canada, the population that was age 65 and above was greater than the population that was age 14 and below. Now, why that's important is that traditionally we look at a lot of healthcare programs. Our pension system is really predicated on the notion of a larger population base at younger ages working, paying taxes to help fund the services of the older demographic in the population. That whole model, of course, is severely compromised now, where you're seeing a model that kind of looked like a Christmas tree, lots of people at the base contributing tax dollars to people at the top. Now it's more of a cylinder, and so that will have profound impacts for how we begin to plan out the healthcare systems and pension systems. Now, why that may be problematic is, again, we get back to politics. It's very difficult. In my province, as an example, the minute you start talking about healthcare, it gets really, really ideologically driven and politically driven. We get into these silos, and there's no great communication between the various interest groups. You know, the physicians have their perspective, the nursing unions have their perspective, individual patients that use the services, taxpayers have their perspective, and then you've got medical suppliers, drug companies. You have all these constituencies, and one of the biggest challenges to the system is to try to get everyone around the table to put their ideological differences aside and just talk frankly about where the system is going. One of the biggest time bombs facing our country over the next little while is, of course, with an aging demographic, is people struggling with Alzheimer's and dementia. And we really don't have a good overarching strategy to deal with that. In the province of Manitoba, where I live, we haven't had a new long-term care facility built in many, many years. And as a consequence, we're just really challenged in terms of how that system's going to handle an aging demographic and increased care needs for the aging loved ones in our families. When we take a look at all these different areas, the one thing that is very disruptive, and we talk about this as we walk through the blogs and the ebook information, is the disruptive force of digital technology, not just on economics and how the economy works and how we access services, but on our families. It was really interesting. A while ago, there was an article, and in that article, Steve Jobs, who founded Apple, one of the founders, was asked about, his kids, do they have the latest iPad or iPhone? And he said, "Are you kidding?" He said, I wouldn't let my kids use that technology. I want my kids to learn to be artistic and to write and to communicate. I mean, the technology is very disruptive when it comes to those kinds of things. So here's someone who is, putting technology in the hands of kids and adults, and you can't go anywhere without people now just looking at their devices. And I think there needs to be a new, almost educational experience, a new awareness. With the genie's out of the bottle, we can't put technology back in, but we need to rethink how we interact with the technology that we have. We look at it from a personal standpoint, an employer standpoint, an employee standpoint. How can we use the technology effectively so it's not disrupting our personal and family lives too much, so that we can use it as a productivity tool, but we're now not allowing it to create this situation where we're very distracted, we're not going deep in terms of the work that we're doing, and we're just flitting from one thing to another. Even the issue of social media, which I think has, social media platforms have a very useful purpose, but there's a dark side to them in terms of, again, people's sort of almost addiction to them. And so I'm not saying they're wrong, but there's actually a need for a training protocol in how we use these technologies effectively. So those are just some of the big trends out there, and we'll talk about those in the posts that follow over the next little while. But more specifically, we'll talk about the strategies, techniques, and ideas to help us to be resilient, to push back against these major forces that we're facing. Both the global macro forces, how do we deal with them, and the personal transition and change forces in our own lives. And so I'm really looking forward to walking you through this journey over the next several weeks as we unpack what it means to be both personally and professionally resilient so we can navigate through the change that's all around us. You take care.